Hello, my name is Ilona, and in this video, in my series of Shadowwork, I want to talk about a book I just read. It's from Gabor Mate, and well, of course, this is the Dutch version, but the English title is In the Realm of Hungry Spirits: Close Encounters with Addiction, and it's about the psychology of addiction. I have to say, this is a very, very interesting book. I really recommend it. It's about almost 500 pages, and I hope I can do justice to the book, because I don't want to make this video too long. But there's so much in this book, so much interesting perspectives, and he is very open. He is a doctor working with at the time that he was writing this book with people that were heavily addicted. He was working in a sort of hotel that was taking care of these people. He was giving them a certain replacement for certain substances, hoping that they wouldn't have to go out on the streets and do all kinds of things. And it's very interesting because he talks about all these stories of people, and makes them very human. And that's very important, because we do have a tendency of looking at people, especially heavily addicted people, it's their own fault, they should stop with that, I'm certain they see that they're destroying their lives, and they're willingly destroying their lives. And he talks about his own addiction, which is very interesting, and his own feeling of moral superiority, looking down at people. He's very honest. He said that he sometimes felt that way, looking down at other addicts. Well, they were in a far worse situation than he was, which is, he mentions that as a lot of people in society still look down upon very addicted people. Like I've mentioned before, they don't have any self-control, they do it themselves. And he mentions his own addiction, which is very interesting. He buys music CDs, especially classical music, and he was not capable of stopping that, because addiction in itself, it has nothing to do with the substances or the behavior, because the behavior or the substances itself is not really that addicting. They tell people that it's very addictive, but he shows scientific studies that in reality, a lot of people tried certain substances, but they do not get addicted. The people that do get addicted actually come from a background where they were brought up in very traumatic circumstances, very stressful circumstances, or if they have not had traumatic experiences or stressful situations, that the parents were not capable of truly emotional tuning in to their children, which is very, very important. And let's face it, a lot of parents are not in touch with their own feelings and emotions, so they certainly have no idea how to handle their children's emotions and feelings. You need to be balanced yourself to really tune into that. So when you grow up in traumatic situations, stressful situations, or if your parents weren't capable of tuning into you, so understanding what you truly needed emotionally, understanding you, seeing you, talking to you, if that wasn't there, you will grow up missing certain receptors in your brain, especially for dopamine, which is very interesting. So there's not just emotional that you feel left out, but you see it in the brains. So you will feel less good. So if you are compared to someone who grows up in a very loving family, where the parents not only love you, because a lot of parents love their children, but they are not capable of really tuning in because they're not balanced themselves. But if you grow up in a very loving family with parents who are very tuned into their children, then you will feel good yourself, because everything, how you grow up, your brain will work around that. You will feel good from your inside. You will inside out. So you don't need to find other substances to make yourself feel good, because addiction is really self-medicating. That's what it is. So if there's an emptiness inside you, and of course if you miss certain receptors or you just have a low level of dopamine, which happens when you grow up with stress, traumas, or just emotional neglect, and you grew up that way, you have an emptiness, and you're going to look outside yourself to soothe yourself. It's like a warm hug. That's actually something he mentions in the book, that one of his clients or patients tell him that it's like a warm hug. So you're still in this childlike state that you're looking for something, and you can find it in yourself because it wasn't given to you. You lack in that. So you feel this emptiness and you try to fill it, and you fill it outside yourself. He mentions that people that use certain substances, that unfortunately, especially because when they don't know what they're taking in, that certain parts in the brain can be permanently damaged. And if that happens, people won't be able to control themselves, because the parts where we make decisions in our brain will be destroyed or just damaged. So there are certain people, especially when they've been on substances for a very long time, that completely changed. So you can't really say that they have a free will anymore, because they are not really capable of making any decisions anymore. I'm sure you've heard of people that have brain damage and that just lost their impulse control. They would just react immediately without thinking. And there wasn't much they can do about that, because those parts were damaged in a certain accident or things like that. So addiction is really about something that you need to do, that you can't stop doing. So a certain behavior or certain substances, you have to go look for it. You don't have control over this behavior. So it's almost a compulsory behavior. You have to do it. You don't have control over it. You will continue even if there's damages done, and it doesn't matter. You feel this restlessness, you feel irritability, and you're longing for that substance to help you out, or that certain behavior. Like I've mentioned, he talks about this himself, about his addiction to classical music. And it had an effect, because he was so focused on that, that he would neglect his wife, wasn't talking to his children or really aligning with them. He really is very honest about that. And he's not only addicted to music, but also a workaholic. He's been a workaholic. So he always lined up all these projects and all these things he could do, so he could kind of escape, and it made him feel good, because it was about his ego. And it's very honest how he mentions things and how he sees things. So I really appreciate that. He also mentions the Red Park experiment, that it's not about the substances. I think it's done by Bruce Alexander and more people, that they actually made like a red park for all these rats, so they can run around, because a lot of experiments are done with animals, unfortunately. But those animals are restricted and kept in captivity, so they already are stressful. So that, of course, will have an effect on how they react to substances. But he mentioned that this red park was very beautiful. It was, those rats could do all kinds of things. And there was like this little tunnel. They could go in and they could get certain substances. And a lot of rats didn't do that. They were not interested in that, because they had so much else to do. And that's very important. A lot of soldiers in Vietnam, they got addicted to certain substances. They could get there because, well, what was going on there felt like, they were completely different environments. They felt very isolated. But when they returned, most of them lost that addiction immediately. So they weren't really addicted to the substance. It was the situation they were in. The soldiers that came back and were still addicted already were in a certain situation before they got over there. So they were already from a dysfunctional family, or from a traumatic background, or emotionally neglected. So they were already missing things inside themselves. So it's very important And that's what I got from his book, that addictions are self-medication. It's your way of coping with things, of handling the emptiness inside, the stress you feel, trying to work around that, because stress also creates this feeling of restlessness, of not knowing how to deal with it. And so you soothe yourself. That's what it is. So the addiction can be all kinds of things, not necessarily substances. It can be behavior, like being a workaholic, always having people around you, surfing the internet, food, gambling. There are so many ways to have an addiction. So you really have to look at yourself. If there's some kind of behavior or thing that you do that you're like, well, do I have control over it? Can I stop doing it? Do I need to do it? Do I have this urge to do it? Well, if all these things are present, then you are addicted to it. So it's not necessarily the behavior or the substances, but it's really this emptiness that you're trying to fill, and everyone has their own ways of filling that. That is what addiction is. He is advocating for a more humane policy towards people that are addicted. Like I've mentioned in this video, we shouldn't look down upon people that are addicted, especially this moral superiority, like, well, they're doing this to themselves, so we cannot, how do you say this, give them some substances, because then we will just be enablers. While he actually mentions that if you just give people some substances that they can use for themselves, they'll be off the streets. They won't have to sell themselves. They won't have to steal. They won't have to do all kinds of activities that will, of course, be harmful for society in general. If they do that in surroundings that is, there are medical people there, that if something goes wrong, they can help out. They can make sure a lot of people won't be so much affected or end up in the hospital. He he tells a lot of stories from his clients, and you can just hear things getting out of control. There are some that have certain diseases, but they cannot get treatment unless they stop with the substance. But they don't stop with the substance because that's how far it goes. They really don't feel like they deserve that, and they just continue the behavior because that's the only thing they have. That's the little child in them that gets some comfort, like this warm hug that they need and they want, and they can't get it, at least not in that moment, in another way. That's what's happening. So he really advocates for a humane policy, that we need to see them as damaged, because that's what they are. And that there are people that are so damaged and their brains are so damaged that really there's not much you can do. You can just reduce the harm to themselves and to their environment, and that's all you can do. But he says that really this fight against this addiction or against certain substances is not going anywhere. No one is winning from this, and it's just creating more and more problems. And I have to say that I do agree that we have to be as humane as possible and really help these people, because at that moment in time they are completely wrapped up in it, and we should try to reduce the harm they do to themselves and to other people. He talks about if you do want to work with that. He also talks about if there's really a choice, if you're that far in your addiction and your brain is completely changed and maybe even damaged in certain parts, do you really have a free will then? Do you really have a choice then? So that's very interesting just to read about that. But if you, of course, are not in that situation, you're not using very heavy substances, it also, of course, depends on what you're addicted to. But if it's a certain behavior, he's talking about how to change that, because you can retrain your brains, especially if there is not like heavy substances or all kinds of damage. You can create new behaviors, you can create, and if you stop with certain substances, you can change the receptors. It's possible for you to change your dopamine levels, but it takes time and it takes new choices you have to make. And he talks about compassionate curiosity. So if you want to change, look at yourself differently, you have to start having compassion for yourself and understanding that this is what you do to self-medicate. Do not, how do you say, tear yourself down. You have to look at your self-hatred and really start understanding this is your way of dealing with it right now. And he talks about retraining, and it's very important that you change your external environment. So especially if you're in an environment where if you've used things, or step out of it, make sure you do not get in touch with certain people that might drag you down. And internally, that's the most important part, that you start changing it. So you start creating new habits of dealing with stress, trauma, emotional parts in yourself. So this is very interesting. He has like 5 points, and the first one is reappoint. And that is, if you feel the urge, look at it objectively. Start looking at it like you're an impartial observer. Okay, this is what I feel. This is the urge that I have. So you can look at it that you actually have a choice. You don't have to act on it. Reframing. So first reappoint, reframing. That means that you can look differently at it and see that it has to do with hormonal responses, brain responses, and that really this is about a response to your emotional need, this emptiness that you feel. So reframe that, then you can refocus. So if you you feel this urge, you can take some time, do something else. Maybe it's just 1 minute or 5 minutes. You can really try to lengthen the time frame. When you feel the urge before you actually do the behavior or take the substance, you can really create a certain more time that will give you the advantage that maybe the urge will go away, or maybe you see that you have more freedom in choosing something else. So refocus means that you're going to do something else at that moment in time. And then you can reevaluate. That's very important. So it's a reappointment, reframing, refocusing, reevaluate. And that is what is it doing to you? What is this addictive behavior doing to you? What is the effect? And it's probably important to write that down every day. So it will remind you what it is you're trying to change and what the effect it has on you. And also that you can anticipate new urges and also accept this is self-medicating. This is about trying to soothe yourself, trying to help yourself. So it's very important. If you really want to change things, you have to accept that part of yourself. That's why it's so important to accept that you're addicted to something. If you don't accept that, if you remain in denial, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to change anything. So you can only change things when you accept it. And the last one is recreate. And that's a very important one. I believe he actually came up with that one himself. I'm not sure where he got the other 4 exactly. I'm sure he wrote that down, but these are the 4 points that are very important if you want to change and look at your addiction differently. But the 5th part he added himself, and that's recreate. And that is, what will your new life be like? Because so many people are so in their addiction. And a couple of years ago, I was really very, I've talked about this. I have a food addiction. So I have all these binges. And that was my life. So if you would have asked me maybe 10 years ago, if I could just stop that, I wouldn't be able to, and I wouldn't even know what my life would be. It would, to me, feel miserable if I didn't have that. Of course, a lot of things have changed, and I still have some binges once in a while, but right now it's going really well because, of course, I start connecting with myself. I start connecting with my emotions and dealing with things in a different way. But it's very, very interesting to recreate, to understand what would my life be without the addiction. How would I want to live my life? So write that down as well. It's very important. And then he talks actually one of the most important things, I think, about spirituality. and surrendering yourself to something bigger than you, because there's a lot of feeling that things are futile. I'm pointless, my life is pointless, so who cares if I use something or not, especially that feeling of futile, of it doesn't matter, it's pointless. Then it's so important to connect with your spiritual power, or spiritual power beyond you. If it's God, the universe, what feels right to you, and understanding. I truly believe we are spiritual beings in a human body. And that really helped me deal with my emotions and my feelings and my addiction. So that changes things, because you are important. We are all God's children, and we are loved in an incredible way. And if we only focus on the emptiness that we feel, we don't understand that behind the emptiness is that deep feeling of love, of being loved. And if we can really connect with that and restore our connection, then it will fill us up, and we won't need anything outside ourselves to soothe ourselves or to medicate ourselves. So that's very important. Spiritual practice and psychological practice. It's necessary both. Because if you just focus on the spiritual practice, there are people actually addicted to that as well. So they're only doing spiritual things and only focusing on the spiritual workshops and things like that. So you really need to ground yourself. You need to work through things that you feel and deal with it in a different way. So I'd like to leave it at that. And I hope to see you in another video. Bye.